The dreaded words you never want to hear. Stand by to copy a number. We're going to talk about FAA enforcements in the hangar. Hi, I'm Dan Milliken.
And I'm Greta Torvart, and today we're going to be talking about FAA enforcement actions with Robert Shulte from Shulte Booth.
Shulte Booth. Robert, thanks for coming back on the show.
Sir. Nice to see
We've
you.
had you before. You were the attorney on the famous Trent case.
For better or worse.
Yeah. All right. Well, FAA enforcement actions, that just, already I can feel my blood pressure going up. What are we talking about here?
Sure. So in order to understand how the enforcement action works, you really have to understand the relationship between the FAA and the NTSB. The NTSB, we all know, is the premier accident investigation agency in the world. They, of course, investigate air crashes, but because it's the National Transportation Administration or agency, they also investigate all manner of accidents, whether it's truck,
Trains.
rail, marine,
Yeah.
exactly. So that's what we know them to be. And of course, when they investigate accidents, regardless of the mode of transportation, they'll issue a factual finding and a statement of probable cause. We believe, based on this factual predicate, that this accident was caused by A, B, and C with contributing factors of X, Y, Z. But the NTSB does something much more important that for most people is invisible. And what they are is essentially a court of law.
The NTSB is.
It is. The NTSB is populated by a cadre of judges called ALJs, or administrative law judges. And their function in our world is simply to adjudicate any disputes between airmen, or I should say FAA certificate holders, and I'll come back to that in a moment, and the FAA itself. They are the judges. They are the courts of law in that arena. They're not Article III judges, meaning that they're not constitutionally appointed, but rather they're a creation of the agency of Congress itself. And I know this may sound like a lot of legal gobbledygook, but it's important for reasons I'll get to in a moment. But at the end of the day, if the FAA comes after you in an enforcement action and you wish to challenge that, you will end up ultimately before an administrative law judge.
Okay. All right. So then why is that important in FAA enforcement actions?
Well, it's important for this reason. The judge, just like any other judge, and by the way, these are trained lawyers. They're just not, bureaucrats, if you will. They are well versed at what they do. But just like in any other court, they hear evidence. They make rulings on, objections to evidence, and they enforce the rules of evidence against the FAA. The FAA in these cases has the burden of proof. They must show by a preponderance of the evidence, more probably than not, that the airman or certificate holder is guilty of the offenses alleged. And I don't like to use the word guilt because this isn't a criminal proceeding, it's an administrative proceeding. But for an airman who's having his certificate threatened, it feels like a criminal proceeding. You're certainly treated like a criminal in some respects. And so the law judge is there to ensure that the airman received what we, colloquially know as due process of law. And it is important because not that long ago, perhaps in the last 15 or 20 years, when the FAA said you were guilty of violating an FAR, that was kind of the end of the conversation. And over time, this system of administrative law has developed that allows the airmen to challenge these allegations. Bear in mind, even if you're a private pilot, you have a lot invested in your certificate, and it is worth protecting. But on balance, the NTSB is there to adjudicate that dispute.
Okay, you use the term airman, and then you correct yourself and you say certificate holder. What's the difference?
Sure, good question. So bear in mind, the authority of the FAA under the Aviation Act of 1958 is to protect and promote air safety. If you ask the FAA, they will tell you that all of the federal aviation regulations are there to protect and promote air safety. And a violation of those regulations in their minds is a compromise to air safety. And the only way they can get the airmen's attention, their certificate holder's attention, is to suspend or revoke that certificate. The authority of the FAA is simply to suspend the operation of the certificate. In other words, to take your privilege away, whether it's the privilege to fly, whether it's the privilege to operate a Part 135 charter, a Part 121 airline, a Part 141 flight school, you name it. If the FAA has issued you a certificate, it can take action against that certificate in one of two ways. It can suspend it or it can revoke it. That's the ultimate sanction. And so that is what all air safety proceedings are about with respect to certificate actions. They are looking to suspend or to revoke the certificate for alleged violations of a or many federal aviation regulations.
So when we're talking about certificates, that could be a worthiness certificate, that could be a flight school operation certificate, that it's not just an airman certificate then.
Correct. Right. It's, anybody that holds an FAA certificate would be subject to an enforcement proceeding in this fashion. There's a whole other side to this as well. The FAA can certainly assess civil penalties against folks as well, and they do that. Rather than pursue a certificate action, they can fine an organization.
I was wondering about that, if FAA has the ability to fine, or is it just pull a certificate?
It's both.
It is both, okay. Because, I did get a call one time from the FSDO inquiring into something had to do with drones, but that kept me awake at nights. And I didn't know, like, am I going to be fined? Am I going to have my certificate pulled or whatever? And by the way, one thing that really led to peace of mind is I had joined the AOPA. They have a attorney. I forgot the name of it.
Legal services plan.
Legal services plan. And I'd paid for that, and I was able to call and talk to an attorney, an aviation attorney that was in my area that really helped. And that gave me some sleep at night, and ended up being a big nothing. But, the FAA, how often do they do fines?
It really depends on the nature of the violation. Oftentimes what we find, especially, let's put aside the airmen for a second, Part 135 operations, they're fairly well monitored by the FAA, but a 135 operation is actually very difficult to run. There's a lot of very specific regulations with which the operator has to comply, and sometimes they fall a little short. If the FAA sees a repetitive shortage, if you will, then sometimes instead of taking a certificate action, they'll fine the operator. Because the fact of the matter is, if you suspend a Part 135 operation, you might as well just shut it down.
Right.
It's almost impossible if they shut them down for 30, 120, 150 days.
For them to come back.
They're bankrupt.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how that works. And so to the FAA's credit, sometimes they're a little reluctant to do that. Sometimes a civil fine will, I guess, garner the necessary attention to come back into compliance. But repeat offenders, they will pull the certificates. And by the way, something I failed to mention, there's really two flavors of enforcement actions. There's just a regular old, we're going to suspend your certificate for X days. But then there's what we call the emergency revocation.
Right.
Those are scary. And they're scary for this reason. When the FAA, and I'm going to get back to how the process works, but when the FAA proposes a suspension of an airman certificate or a Part 135, when you challenge that, the suspension is stayed, meaning that it's not effective until the dispute is resolved. Some of these disputes go on for years. Trent's case went on for years.
Right.
And during the course of that, he was able to fly as it worked its way through the alimentary canal of the legal process. But thank you. But the emergency revocation is a completely different animal. And in an emergency revocation hearing, the FAA is alleging that what you are doing presents a very high risk to aviation safety, and we're stopping you right now. And when that order issues, it's effective immediately, meaning that you get notice, you're out of the sky, or you're shut down until we get this sorted out.
Even if you appeal?
Even if you appeal.
Okay, so when you say that, I instantly think about Martha Lunkin, and what she went through. And it took them a year to make an emergency revocation. Like, if it was such
an emergency,
such a threat to safety,
an imminent threat, then, right.
Yes. So there are some cases where the FAA has alleged an emergency, and they've taken their, for lack of a better, sweet old time of actually going through the process. Some administrative law judges have said, yeah, there's not much of an emergency here. But bear in mind, And again, this is the stuff that lawyers like to think about and drives other people crazy. But the question is, okay, how do we evaluate the emergency? Meaning that if I'm going to appeal, not the underlying merits, in other words, not what you did or didn't do, but based on the allegations, is this an imminent threat to air safety? You can appeal that question, and only that question, and you've got 2 days to do it.
Oh, wow.
2 days. So if an emergency revocation action comes through my door, I'm dropping everything I'm doing. I have to. I've got 2 days to note that appeal and at least cobble together an argument to say, no, there really isn't an imminent threat to air safety. We can just sort this out in the regular course. You're going to lose that argument 99% of the time.
Really?
Yeah. So because the standard of review of that is simply based on the allegation in the administrator's complaint, the FAA's complaint, does this set forth an imminent threat to air safety? The answer to that question is usually yes. They're not going to look at the underlying merits. They're just looking at the allegations. I mostly tell folks, if it's an emergency, we'll do what we call waive the emergency. I'm not going to spend your money fighting a battle I'm probably going to lose. Let's deal with the underlying merits. In other words, let's test what they're actually saying. But for the purposes of appealing the emergency order, the court's only going to look at what's said in the complaint and assume all those facts are true. It's a hard thing to win.
So basically, you have to assume if somebody comes to you with an issue like that you're moving ahead with the emergency process,
Right.
which is a lot shorter than the normal.
Precisely. But to your point, why did it take Martha Lincoln's case to get resolved? More likely than not, her counsel, quote unquote, waived the emergency, meaning that, okay, we know we're suspended. Let's just sort this out in the normal course. That's probably because of what she and her counsel did, not what the FAA did.
Okay, gotcha.
Because if you don't waive the emergency, then after that 2-day appeal period expires, you're going to a hearing within 30 days. It's very
Well,
fast.
what I was saying is that she got her emergency revocation in the mail a year after the event.
I'm not sure I agree with that. But to be fair, I'm not that familiar with the case.
Okay.
I only know of it.
Okay.
But suffice it to say, when the emergency order issues, you've got 2 days to note the
Okay.
appeal.
Right.
After that, then the conversation's over. But your normal enforcement proceeding starts out like this. You'll get a letter from a FSDO. It's called an LOI, Letter of Investigation.
Okay.
In common parlance, it's the FAA saying, hey, we think you screwed up,
And we're going to look into this.
or we're going to look into this. And here's your opportunity to tell us your side of the story. Don't.
Don't.
No. Just like in the Fifth Amendment, you have a right to remain silent. You should exercise that right and guard that
Okay.
right rather jealously. I'm sorry to say it. I wish I could say it differently than this, but when that letter comes, they're not looking to be your friend. They're not looking to resolve the case in your favor. They're looking for a scalp. They're looking for your ticket. That's the whole point. Once that letter is sent, they already feel like something's up. You're being investigated. And that is why, along with that letter, you'll get an attachment. And the attachment says, here are your rights under the Pilot's Bill of Rights. We'll talk about that some other time. But what it says, and among other things, is love to talk to you, but you don't have to.
Okay.
You
And
should
that you
take those
shouldn't.
words to heart,
And that you shouldn't.
and you
Okay.
shouldn't. There's some exceptions to that, but on balance, they're not your friend. So after that, and what the letter generally says is, here's what we think happened, and gee, without your input, we're just going to go ahead and proceed, based on our investigation. After that letter, the next thing that comes is an NOCP, Notice of Certificate Action, or an NOCA, NOCA. And that says, we're suspending your certificate because we believe on this date you did X, Y, and Z, and that X, Y, Z constitutes a violation of these federal aviation regulations. That is the order of suspension.
Okay.
At that point, you can challenge it.
Okay. And what is the difference between suspension and revocation?
Suspension means, as the name suggests, that you're not going to be able to fly for some set period. And again, we're only talking about airmen right now.
Right.
But you're not going to be able to operate, if you will, in the airman's case, fly for a period of X days. The FAA has a whole thing called a sanctions guidance table that's a matrices of violations versus time of suspension.
So this equals that. and-
Exactly. It's akin to the federal sentencing guidelines, but essentially it's based on the severity of the violation, the intentionalness of the violation, and the likely consequences of the violation. And then they do their math, and all of a sudden we get to bang 120 days or whatever it is.
Right.
Okay. Revocation, you're done. they'll pull your license and your license is effectively canceled.
But you can always start over.
Sure.
Okay. Is there ever a time that they can do a revocation and you cannot start over?
I believe there are some unique individuals out there that do have a lifetime ban. You can never fly again. I think it's a handful of people. They do have that authority under certain extreme.
They do, okay.
They do.
Because like Trevor Jacob did what many people think would be the death penalty as far as your certificate, but yet he, for 10 months, got it revocated and he just went and got it again.
Yeah, you can do that, but you're essentially starting from ground zero. Now, you don't lose your time.
Yeah, they can't take away your
You
time.
They can't take away your
Right.
time.
So really all you're doing is a few little things you have to clean up and then check ride.
Well, those few little things would be taking the written exam again
Right.
and going through, you're taking a check.
Yeah,
ride
but you
again.
got your time. That's important.
Yeah,
So
they
you're
can't
not-
take the time away from you, although some of the noises being made today suggest they might want to do that. But
Well, yeah, that's the whole, the breaking news is the Transportation Secretary saying that they want to start going after certificates more for mishaps. But that's more on the airline side, but,
well, no, it's not, because respectfully, that event was a Part 135 operator who blew his taxi clearance.
oh, that's right, he was talking about the Midway.
Right.
Right.
And so, but that just as easily happens to general aviation pilots too. I've done it.
Oh, yeah, we all make
Not recently.
boneheaded yeah. You sure you want to say that on
But
Scratch
no,
that.
it's,
breaking news? Attorney's been, sorry.
there's always this tension between a safety system where we want to encourage honest and candid reporting about events so we can address how these events occurred. Even when people make mistakes, there's usually some root cause or some predicate cause to why that mistake was made. Nobody goes out there, almost nobody goes out there and says, you know what? I'm going to run over that hold short line and cross that runway. I don't give a darn what that tower told me.
Right.
That's not how these things happen.
Except for Cirrus plane owners, but right.
So if we're truly honest and we really mean that we want to have a system where we're all working towards that goal of safety,
Right.
Then yes, we want candid reporting. We want pilots to confess their sins. The problem is that we have this 800-pound gorilla called the FAA that's all too willing to take that confession and use it against you. And so that's always going to be in tension. And I honestly don't know how to resolve it. That's the same in medical reporting as well. It's a very similar system where if a doctor or a nurse or any medical provider reports a problem, that information can't be used against them in any proceeding. That's not true here.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I think the FAA would do well to take some guidance from the medical industry, who has its own warts to be sure. But if we really want pilots to self-report, then we got to create the environment that encourages that. Right now, this environment doesn't do that.
So the NASA reporting doesn't do that?
Well, the NASA reporting, it does, but it's imperfect, to be sure. They can't use what you told the NASA people about it in that report, but if you talk to them and confess, because let's
They
face
can
it,
use that.
they can
Then
use that
it's
against you.
Being the FAA.
So again, don't get legal help right away.
NASA's all fine and well, but NASA has nothing to do with enforcing these regulations. NASA has nothing to do with writing these regulations. And that brings us back to the NTSB for a moment. The NTSB, more often than not, will adopt recommendations as a result of its investigations and make those recommendations to the FAA. But whether the FAA chooses to follow them or not, the NTSB can't do anything about that.
Right.
They have no enforcement authority whatsoever. They're investigators. And so there is always a little bit of tension between the FAA.
And the NTSB.
Right, because sometimes the NTSB will issue some recommendations, but sometimes those recommendations can be very, very expensive.
Yeah, I mean, I remember listening to the NTSB briefing after Kobe Bryant, and they were mad at the FAA because they had years ago, provided recommendations that would have stopped that from happening, and blah blah blah.
And that's not the first time that happened. When the modern FAA was created in 1958 with the Federal Aviation Act of 1958, they had a dual mandate: to promote aviation and to promote aviation safety.
Right.
Those things are always in conflict. And with the, I believe it was a ValueJet 592 when that crashed into the Florida Everglades, there was a lot of pressure upon Congress to perhaps strip the FAA of that mandate to promote aviation, to focus strictly on aviation safety. There's a fair amount of debate about whether or not that was entirely successful because of these latest incidents with Boeing. The regulators are still pretty cozy with the regulated, especially in the higher echelons of the industry, and they are still allowing, and that may have changed recently, the manufacturers to sign off on their own compliance.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
we did a good job today.
Right.
And then, doors
I
cut.
can't see any problem with that.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you have doors cutting loose at 16,000
Right.
feet. So I think there's a lot of pressure on the FAA, unfortunately, and this is really to bring my comments full circle, to get more aggressive with enforcement, not less.
Which then for all of us, general aviation, it trickles down and we might see a more aggressive enforcement. We might.
We might. I will say this, if you get that letter, it's probably best to get some counsel. It doesn't have to be me. There's plenty of guys and gals out there that do this work.
Would it be any attorney or should people look for an aviation-specific attorney
If it were me, I'd look for somebody that's aviation specific.
who has dealt with the FAA?
Well, and the federal aviation regulations, they're kind of a strange thing.
It's an entirely different set of rules, right, from normal practice, non-aviation practice.
Yeah, it's not even just the substantive rules themselves, like, for example, the 91.319 rule, the Trent Palmer rule.
Right.
We can all read it and know what it says, but the question is when the FAA is knocking at your door, somebody that well understands that process is probably better equipped to handle that than somebody that's never been through it before.
And does it make any difference in these FAA enforcement cases what state, say, a lawyer or a firm is barred in?
No, and the beauty of that is, of course, as you know, lawyers are barred by a state, but because this is federal law, whether your counsel's in California, Maryland, Florida, Oklahoma, it doesn't matter. He or she can handle the case anywhere in the country.
And that's pretty much any FAA enforcement action?
Yes,
Because it's a federal
right,
situation.
it's all federal law.
Okay, that's good to know. All
But
right.
just one last thing, let me say this. If you don't like the result that you got, in your FAA enforcement case, if the administrative law judge rules against you, you can appeal from that as well. And the next stop would be the full board of the NTSB,
Oh, that's right, full board. And then after that, it's U.S. Court of Appeals.
U.S. Court of Appeals,
And we get
correct.
out of the,
Then you're out of the NTSB system. But we've got a good cadre of judges there. I have a lot of respect and regard for them. They have a heavy caseload. They do a good job. I don't always agree with the rulings, but more recently than not, I'm comfortable that I'm being heard.
okay,
10 years ago, I wouldn't have said that.
okay,
10 years ago, I would have felt like one of the Ceausescu's going in trial.
okay.
Here's your trial. It's 20 minutes. You're going to get shot out back when it's done.
Wow.
I'm
I'm glad we're not there anymore.
We're not there anymore. They've come a long way, and I think with the advent of the Pilot's Bill of Rights, I think the hearings now have become a lot more balanced.
Okay. All right. Well, very good. If somebody does want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to?
They can reach me at my mobile, 410-804-1592, or they can reach me at my email address, which is rshulte@schultebooth.com.
Okay, so brave. He puts his mobile out there.
I know. What about a website?
www.schultebooth.com.
All right.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you, Robert, for
My
coming
pleasure.
on. We'll have you on again, talk about Pilot's Bill of Rights soon.
I look forward to it.
Close.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you guys for watching. We appreciate you. And don't forget our sponsors, like 67 Designs. They make the best camera tablet mounts for your plane, your boat, your car. Also, Marshall Protective Services, mpsprotects.com. Flying Eyes. Use our discount code at flyingeyesoptics.com. Taking off, all caps, one word, 10% off. And Clemens Insurance, clemensinsurance.net. Z-Vision, xevision.com. Brightest landing and taxi lights out there. I've got some on my 210. They light up the world. All right, we'll see you guys next time.
In the hangar.